He hadn't smiled in 20 years, not at victory, not at power, not at wealth that made entire governments nervous. But one Tuesday morning, in the coldest room in the most powerful house in the city, a maid who talked too much said something she had no business saying, and the corner of his mouth moved. Just barely. Just once. The man beside him dropped his pen. He had never seen that. Not even close. If stories like this stay with you, subscribe right now. Because this one doesn't just get intense, it gets under your skin. The estate sat at the edge of the city like a warning. No gates with decorative iron, no fountains, no invitation to admire it. Just high stone walls, cameras that never blinked, and the kind of silence that told you very clearly, you are not welcome here unless someone decided you were. And the man who made that decision lived on the top floor. His name was Kalen Voss. Not a name that appeared in newspapers. Not a name that showed up on boards of directors or charity galas or Forbes lists, because men like Kalen Voss did not need visibility. Visibility was for people who still had something to prove. He had proven everything at 22, and walked away from the proof at 23. 43 now. Controlled. Precise. The kind of man whose silence felt louder than other men's shouting. His staff of 31 moved through the estate like they were navigating something delicate. Because in many ways, they were. No one spoke unless spoken to. No one lingered. No one laughed. Not in the corridors. Not in the kitchens. Not anywhere near the upper floors where he existed in a quiet so complete it had become its own kind of atmosphere. There was a rule in the estate, unwritten, unspoken, but understood by every single person who worked within those walls. Do not be noticed. Do your job. Disappear. Come back tomorrow. Repeat. The ones who followed that rule lasted. The ones who didn't, well, there were stories. The kind people told in the staff quarters at night in whispers, as if saying them too loudly might summon consequences. 20 years. That was how long he had run things from behind these walls. 20 years of decisions that had no official record, of consequences that never needed explaining, of a reputation maintained so precisely that even his most formidable rivals referred to him in the kind of tone people use for weather, as something simply present, simply powerful, not to be questioned or reasoned with. And in all that time, not one member of his staff had ever seen him smile, not once. Until her. But she had no idea what was coming. She was too busy talking. Her name was Sawersa Mbeki. And she had been warned. Twice, actually. Once by the hiring agency, and once by the senior housekeeper on her very first morning, a tall woman named Dressler, who had the eyes of someone who had survived things she would never discuss. You will speak only when spoken to, Dressler had said, looking at Saoirse the way a surgeon looks at a complication. You will not hum. You will not sing. You will not make unnecessary sounds of any kind. You will move through this house like you are part of the furniture. Do you understand? Saoirse had nodded. She had meant it too. The problem was, she always meant it. She meant it every single time. And then something happened. Something small and ordinary and human. And the words just came. Like water, finding a crack. Unstoppable, and completely unaware of the trouble they were about to cause. It was her third day. She was dusting the east corridor. The long one. The one lined with paintings that looked like they cost more than her entire village. When she noticed one of them was crooked. Not dramatically, just slightly. The kind of crooked that bothered you once you saw it and couldn't be unseen. She straightened it. Then she stepped back, tilted her head, and said, to no one, because she thought she was alone. There. You looked like you were about to fall off a cliff and take the whole wall with you. Very undignified for a painting your size. Silence. The specific kind of silence that happens after you have said something in a room you thought was empty and then realize it isn't. She turned. Kalen Voss stood 6 feet away. He wasn't supposed to be on this floor. That was the thing she would think about later, lying awake in her small staff room, replaying it with the particular horror of someone watching their own slow-motion disaster. He never came to this floor in the mornings. Everyone knew that. It was one of the many things Dressler had told her. But here he was. Dark clothing, perfectly still. Expression that gave away absolutely nothing except that he had heard every single word she just said to a painting. Saoirse's brain offered her several options in that moment. Apologize. Explain. Simply cease to exist. She chose none of them. Because what came out instead, and she would genuinely never be able to explain this, was, "I'm sorry. I didn't see you there. You're very quiet for someone, so—" She stopped. Looked at him. Finished the sentence anyway because stopping halfway felt somehow worse. Large. Nothing moved in his face. Not a flicker. Not a twitch. Nothing. He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that had made grown men in boardrooms lose the thread of their argument entirely. And then he turned and walked away, without a single word. Saoirse stood very still. Then she turned back to the painting. "That," she whispered, "was entirely your fault." Across the estate, on the top floor, Kalen Voss sat behind his desk and picked up the file his assistant had prepared on every new staff member. He found her page, read it once, closed the file, opened it again. There was something in his expression that his assistant, had he been present, would not have recognized. Not irritation, not disapproval. Something older than both of those. Something that hadn't surfaced in a very long time. He was curious. And Kalen Voss had learned one thing about his own curiosity. It never let go until it had its answer. That was the moment everything changed. She just didn't know it yet. The whispers started the next morning. Not loud, not obvious. The kind that lived in the half-second pause before someone looked away, in the sudden quiet when Saoirse walked into the linen room, in the way 3 of the senior maids found reasons to be in the same corridor at the same time she was. She noticed. She always noticed things. It was the same instinct that made her talk. A hyper-awareness of the world around her that she had never quite learned to switch off. What she couldn't figure out was why. She hadn't done anything. She had dusted a corridor, straightened a painting, said something regrettable to a man she hadn't known was standing behind her, and apparently survived it. So why were they watching her? The answer came at lunch. Her name was Valdis Oren. She appeared in the staff dining room the way certain people always appeared, as if the space had been waiting for her to arrive and to organize itself accordingly. Late 20s, immaculate, the kind of beautiful that was also somehow a statement of intent. She was not a maid. Her uniform was different, crisper, darker, with a small silver pin at the collar that Saoirse would later learn marked her as the estate's personal coordinator, which meant she answered only to Kalen Voss himself. She sat down across from Saoirse without being invited. "You're the new one," she said. Not a question. "Saoirse." She offered her hand. Valdis looked at it briefly, then back up. "I know your name." A pause, measured, deliberate. "I know everything about everyone in this house. That's my job." Saoirse lowered her hand. "That sounds exhausting." A coolness moved behind Valdis's eyes. Not offense. Something far more deliberate than offense. "I heard about yesterday. The corridor." Saoirse let the silence answer. "You spoke to him." Another pause. "Without being spoken to first." "Technically, I spoke to a painting. He was just in the vicinity." Valdis studied her for a long moment. The dining room had gone very quiet. No one was pretending not to listen. "You find this amusing," Valdis said softly. I find it, Saoirse considered, unfortunate, but survivable, apparently. Valdis leaned forward slightly. Just slightly. Don't, she said, her voice dropping to something that no longer resembled conversation. Misread survival for safety. Those are two very different things in this house. She stood, straightened her jacket, looked down at Saoirse one final time. Invisible is the only thing that keeps you here. Remember that. She left. The dining room exhaled. Saoirse looked down at her food. Invisible. She had been trying that her entire life. The problem was, she was very, very bad at it. And somewhere in this estate, a man had already opened her file twice. That was not the beginning of Invisible. That was something else entirely. And it was already in motion. 3 days later, she was summoned. Not by Dressler, not by Valdis, by a message. Handwritten, 4 words on a slip of cream paper slid under her door at precisely 6 in the morning. Top floor, 7 o'clock. No name, no explanation, no instruction beyond the time and the location. But in this house, there was only one person who lived on the top floor. Only one person whose instructions came without signatures, because signatures implied the possibility of questioning, and that was not a possibility he entertained. Saoirse stood in the corridor outside his study at 6:59, telling herself she was calm. She was not calm. She knocked at exactly 7. A single knock, firm enough to be heard, quiet enough, she hoped, to communicate that she understood the gravity of where she was standing. Come in. His voice was lower than she had expected. Or maybe it was the hour. Or maybe it was the fact that the room itself seemed to absorb sound the way deep water absorbed light. Completely, without return. She entered. The study was vast and spare. No clutter, no softness. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that held actual books, not decorative spines. A desk the size of a small country. And behind it, Kalen Voss, not looking at her, looking at the document in his hand. She stood, waited. He read for another full minute before he set the document down and looked up. Sit. She sat. He observed her the way someone observes a problem they have not yet decided how to solve, methodically, without hostility, but without warmth either. Just assessment, pure and unsparing. You spoke to a painting, he said. Yes. Why? It wasn't really a question, but Saoirse had the sense that the wrong answer would matter, and the sense also, sharper, more instinctive, that a rehearsed answer would matter even more. So she gave him the true one. It was crooked. I straightened it. And then I felt... She paused. I always feel like I should acknowledge things when I've interfered with them, even objects. It seemed rude not to. A silence. You felt it was rude, he said slowly, not to explain yourself to a painting. When you say it like that, it sounds worse than it is. Nothing moved in his face, but she had the strangest sensation, brief, almost imagined, that something had moved. Not visibly. Somewhere deeper. Tell me something, he said. Does it ever stop? She blinked. Sir? The talking. She considered being offended, decided against it. Occasionally, when I'm asleep, and sometimes when I'm genuinely quite frightened. Though, she stopped herself. Finish it. She looked at him carefully. Though even then, it usually just slows down rather than stopping completely. Another silence, longer this time. You're not frightened now, he said. It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't an accusation. It was simply an observation, the kind that meant he had noticed. I'm somewhat frightened, she said honestly. But you asked me a question, and I've always found it harder to be quiet when someone actually wants to know something. Even if that someone is... She stopped again. Too late again. Even if that someone is... What? She met his gaze, held it. Intimidating. The words settled between them. He looked at her, long enough that the clock on the far wall became audible. A slow, measured tick that sounded like it was counting something specific. Then, "You're assigned to the West Wing from today, not the East Corridor." She waited. "The West Wing includes this floor." He picked up his document again, signaling the end of the meeting. "You'll continue your duties as normal. You will not speak unless required. You will not—" A pause, barely perceptible. "Address the furniture." Saoirse stood. She was almost at the door when his voice caught her again. "Mbeki." She turned. He was still looking at his document. "The painting you straightened. In the East Corridor. Third from the left." "Yes." "It's been crooked for 11 months. A beat. Every member of staff has walked past it. For 11 months." She waited, unsure where this was going. He turned a page. "You've been here 3 days." She understood then. It wasn't a compliment. Not exactly. But it was something. The acknowledgement that she had seen what no one else had bothered to see or had been too cautious to fix. She left without another word. In the corridor, she pressed her back against the wall and breathed. Downstairs, Valdis Oren received the update from her contact. Same day, 30 minutes later. She listened without expression. Then she picked up her phone and made a call she had been postponing. "She's been moved to the West Wing," she said quietly. "He did it himself." A pause on the other end. "Yes," Valdis said. "That's what I thought too." She hung up, sat very still. Because in 12 years, Kalen Voss had never personally reassigned a member of staff. That was beneath his attention. Or it had been. Until 3 days ago. Until her. And the person on the other end of that call, the one whose reach extended far beyond these walls, was already deciding what to do about it. Saoirse Mbeki was very, very small. For now. It happened on a Thursday evening. A dinner. Not a staff dinner. Saoirse had been told 3 hours in advance, by Dressler, in the clipped tone of someone delivering news they found personally inconvenient, that she was to help serve in the main dining room that night. A gathering of 6 guests. Business. Private. "You stay near the wall," Dressler said. "You pour when glasses are low. You do not speak. You do not make eye contact. You are background." "I do," Saoirse said. She was trying very hard. The dining room was everything the rest of the estate was not. Deliberately impressive. Long table, low light, crystal that caught flame and split it into colors. 6 men who carried themselves the way powerful men did in the presence of someone more powerful. Carefully, aware of every inch between them and the head of the table. Where Kalen Voss sat. Still. Watching. Saying very little. Saoirse stayed near the wall. She poured. She retreated. She was background. She almost made it through the entire evening. The man at the far end of the table had been watching her since she entered. Not subtly, not respectfully. The kind that made the back of your neck feel like a warning. When she leaned across to refill his glass, his hand closed around her arm. Not by accident. There was no version of that grip that was accidental. "You're new," he said, loud enough for the table to hear. Saoirse went very still. She did not pull away. She did not speak. Every word that lived just behind her teeth went extraordinarily quiet, because she understood with sudden cold clarity that this was not a moment for talking. Let her go. The table stopped. Not paused. Stopped. The way sound stops when something overrides it entirely. Kalen Voss had not raised his voice. He had not moved from his chair. He had simply spoken, quietly, without any decoration of pressure. And the room had responded the way rooms responded to him. Immediately. Completely. The man released her arm. Saoirse straightened, stepped back, did not look at Kaelin, but she felt him. The weight of his attention shifted fully, entirely in her direction, in a room full of men who commanded entire industries. He had paused the table for her. 2 words. That was all it took. She moved back to the wall. Her heart was doing something complicated. Later, in the corridor outside, Valdis watched her pass without a word. But her eyes, cold, already measuring, followed her all the way to the stairwell. 3 of the 6 men at that table reported to the same person Valdis had called. Kaelin pausing a dinner for a maid barely 1 week in. That changed plans, upgraded them, made them urgent. The protection hadn't kept her safe. It had made her a target. And the night was far from over. It didn't look like pressure. That was the cleverness of it. It was a Sunday. The estate was quieter than usual. Most of the senior staff had the afternoon off, and the corridors on the west wing felt longer somehow, emptier, the way spaces do when the people who normally populate them are gone. Saoirse was carrying a stack of fresh linens to the storage room when the floor shifted beneath her feet. Not dramatically, just wrong. A single tile near the top of the back stairwell that moved when she stepped on it, the way tiles moved when someone had recently loosened the grout, when someone had planned exactly this. She grabbed the rail. Barely. The linens went everywhere. A slow, cascading fall of white cotton down 12 steps. And she stood at the top of the stairwell with one hand on the rail and her heart in her throat, understanding very clearly that if she hadn't grabbed the rail, that was not a stumble she would have walked away from. She stood there. Then she picked up the linens, folded them, and said nothing to anyone. But someone had seen. Raith Declan, Kaelin's head of estate management, a quiet man with the kind of stillness that suggested he had once been very loud in a previous life, had been watching the corridor feed from the monitoring room. He had seen the tile shift. He had seen her grab the rail. He had seen, in the 2 seconds before she steadied herself, what would have happened. He reviewed the footage. Then he went upstairs. Kaelin watched it once, set the tablet down. Who has access to that stairwell? Raith gave him the list. 14 names. Kaelin looked at the list for a long time. Then he drew a line through 13 of them, one by one, methodically, based on schedule, access, and reasoning he did not explain aloud. The name remaining was not Valdis. It was the name Valdis reported to. A name Kaelin recognized. A name that meant this was no longer an inconvenience. This was an opening move by someone who understood that approaching him directly was impossible. So they had chosen the person closest to him instead. He sat with that for a moment, not because it surprised him, because it told him something precise and important about how seriously they were taking her presence. People did not make moves like this over things that didn't matter. They made moves like this over things they were beginning to consider a problem. Saoirse Mbeki, who talked to paintings and asked inconvenient questions and had been in this house for less than 2 weeks, had already become someone's problem. He picked up his phone. Review every access point on the West Wing and find out who entered the 3rd-floor stairwell outside their scheduled hours. He hung up. His eyes moved to the window. And for the first time in a very long time, his expression had shifted away from calculation entirely. It was resolve. They had chosen the wrong person to pressure. They just didn't know it yet. She found out on a Monday, not from official paperwork, not from Dressler, from a sealed envelope slid under her door before dawn. Estate letterhead, precise formatting, Valdis Oren's signature at the bottom. Effective immediately, your assignment is transferred to the external property. Report to the facility manager at 7 a.m. Saoirse sat on the edge of her bed and read it twice. Then she set it down and did not speak, which was, for her, a significant event. External property. She didn't know what that was, But she knew what it wasn't. It wasn't the West Wing. It wasn't the top floor corridor, or the study, or any of the spaces she had spent the past 10 days quietly, incrementally becoming part of. It was exile. Dressed in administrative language, but exile. She had spent her entire adult life learning not to want things too much. It made leaving easier. It made every place feel like something borrowed, never owned. But this house had gotten past that. She hadn't planned it. It had simply happened. Gradually, and then all at once. She folded the letter and went to find Dressler. Dressler received her in the housekeeper's office with the expression of someone who had been expecting this and prepared accordingly. "It's a standard reassignment," Dressler said. "It isn't standard," Saoirse said. "I was assigned to the West Wing by him personally. Staffing decisions are managed through the coordination office, which is Valdis." Dressler said nothing. "Who made this decision?" Saoirse said. "Specifically, who?" A long pause. Dressler's eyes went to the window, then back. "Pack your things tonight," she said quietly. "The car comes at 6. She left. Saoirse stood alone in the empty office. She was not angry. She was something more precise than angry. She was certain. Certain this was not administrative. Certain it was deliberate. Certain someone had weighed the cost of moving her and decided the math favored removal. What she didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that on the top floor, Kalen Voss had just been handed a copy of the same envelope, and the expression on his face was something Wraith, standing in the doorway, had never seen before. Not in all the years he had worked there. That realization, quiet as it was, changed everything about what happened next. She found out on Wednesday that the transfer had been cancelled. Not from official paperwork. From Wraith, who appeared in the West Wing corridor while she was polishing the window frames and said simply, without preamble, "The transfer was cancelled." Saoirse stopped polishing. "By whom?" she asked. Wraith looked at her steadily. "Who do you think?" She went back to the window. Kept polishing. Because her hands needed something to do with the feeling that had just moved through her. A weight too large and formless to name yet. "I don't need protecting," she said. Quietly. Not defensively. Just. As a fact she wanted acknowledged. "I know," Wraith said. "I've been managing on my own for a long time." "I know that too." She stopped. Looked at him. "Then why?" Wraith considered this. He was the kind of man who thought before he spoke. The opposite of her in almost every way, and she had learned to respect his silences. "I've worked for him for 14 years, he said finally. "I've seen him make 1,000 decisions. I've never once seen him reverse someone else's without being asked to." She absorbed that. "He wasn't asked," Wraith said, and then he left. Saoirse stood alone in the corridor and thought about that for a long time. That evening, returning the cleaning supplies to the West Wing storage room, she turned the corner and found Kalen Voss standing in the corridor. Not walking, not passing through. Just standing. The way he stood near windows. As if stillness were his natural state when the world didn't require something of him. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You canceled the transfer," she said. "Yes." "Without asking me." "You were still here Wednesday." Something in his expression shifted, very slightly. "You knew about the notice. You stayed anyway." She opened her mouth. Closed it. He was right. And the fact that he had read her that precisely, without a single conversation about it, did something unexpected to her composure. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked. Aimed somewhere she wasn't entirely sure she meant to aim. Kalen was quiet for a moment. "Because you see things," he said, "that other people have stopped seeing." She understood, and did not understand, both at the same time. In the space between those two things, something shifted between them that had no name yet but was already occupying the air like a third presence. And then, from somewhere below, a sound. Not loud, just wrong. Every light in the west wing went dark simultaneously. In the sudden, complete stillness, Kalen's voice came from exactly where he had been standing. "Don't move." The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. The lights came back in 40 seconds. It felt longer. When they returned, Kalen was already moving, not toward the stairwell, not toward the exits, but toward the east-facing window at the end of the corridor. He looked down at the courtyard below with the focused, unhurried attention of someone confirming what they already suspected. Saoirse came to stand beside him. Below, at the far edge of the courtyard, a car sat with its engine running. Black. No plates. The driver's side door was open, and leaning against the hood, arms folded, looking directly up at the window as if he had known exactly which window to look at, was a man. Tall. Composed in the particular way that certain people were composed, not because nothing unsettled them, but because they had long since learned to appear as if nothing could. He simply stood there and waited to be seen. "Who is that?" Saoirse asked. Kalen was quiet for a moment. "His name is Zoran Hale." The name meant nothing to her, but the way Kalen said it, flat, careful, with the particular evenness of someone managing a reaction, meant everything. "He's not a stranger to you," she said. "No." "Rival?" Kalen's eyes stayed on the window. "Something more complicated than that." Below, Zoran Hale tilted his chin upward slightly. Not a wave, not a gesture of hostility. Just an acknowledgement, the nod of a man who had found exactly what he came to find. His eyes moved, briefly, precisely, away from Kalen, to her. He stayed there for 2 seconds. Then he got in the car and was gone through the south gate. Kalen stepped back from the window. She felt the change in him. Not in the words he wasn't saying, but in the quality of his stillness. It had been still before. Now it was the stillness of something being calculated. "He saw me," she said. "Yes." "That was the point of this visit." "Yes," he said again. And the way he said it, measured, quiet, carrying the weight of something she couldn't quite name yet, was worse than any explanation he could have offered, because it meant this was not a coincidence, and that was much worse. He came to her room that night, not without warning. Wraith knocked first, told her Kalen needed to speak with her, that it was not optional and not pressing in the way that meant something was wrong, but pressing in the way that meant now. She found him standing outside her room rather than inside it. She noticed that, in a house where he owned every inch of space, he had waited in the corridor for her. They sat at the small table near the window, her on one side, him on the other, and he placed a folder between them. "I had your background checked," he said. "Standard. Every staff member. I know. What I found was not standard." He opened the folder. "There are gaps in your records. Entire years where documentation either doesn't exist or was created after the fact." Saoirse looked at the papers, at dates, at the clean official blankness of what should have been her history. "I know," she said again, quieter. He looked at her. "You know. I've known for a long time that something was wrong with my records. I grew up in 4 different homes after my mother passed away. Government placements, the kind of system that loses paperwork constantly. Or so I believed." A pause. "I stopped questioning it eventually. It's exhausting, questioning something you can't change." "Your mother," he said. "How did she pass?" The question landed the way it always did, like pressure applied to something that had healed improperly. "A road accident," Saoirse said. "I was 9. I wasn't in it." She looked at the table. The other driver was never found. What was her name? She looked up. Why? His expression was careful, the particular carefulness of someone who has information they are deciding how to deliver. Because the gaps in your records don't start at her passing, they start 4 years before it. Silence. That's not possible, Saoirse said slowly. It is. Someone was managing your documentation before you were old enough to have a history worth managing. He closed the folder. Whoever erased you started when you were 5 years old. The room became very small. My mother's name was Isra, Saoirse said, barely above a whisper. Isra Mbeki. A reaction crossed Kaylin's face. Swift, controlled, but not quite fast enough. That name, she said. You recognize it. He was quiet for a moment too long. Kaylin. It was the first time she had used his given name. Neither of them acknowledged it. But it sat in the air between them. Small, irreversible. Isra Mbeki, he said carefully, worked as an interpreter for a network that operated across 4 countries 15 years ago. The network was eventually shut down. When it was, everyone connected to it either disappeared, stepped away, or... He stopped. Or lost everything, Saoirse said. Yes. She sat with that. The accident, she said. You think it wasn't. I think the other driver was never found because finding them was never the priority of whoever oversaw the investigation. He held her gaze. I think your mother knew something, and I think whoever she knew it about has been making sure that you, the only person who might eventually ask the right questions, stayed small, stayed lost, stayed impossible to trace. Saoirse looked down at her hands. They were not shaking. She was almost surprised by that. So Zoran Hale, she said quietly, was at the center of that network. Kaylin's voice was low and deliberate. Yes. She looked up. He didn't come here to see what I have, she said. A pause. He came here because he already knew I was here. Her voice was steady, completely steady. And he wanted you to know that he knew. Kaylin held her gaze. He didn't look surprised she had reached it. He looked like he had been waiting for her to reach it. And that, the waiting, the patience of it, the faith embedded in that patience, was the thing that finally cracked something open in her that she hadn't known was closed. The message arrived the next morning. Not electronically, not through any channel that could be easily traced. It arrived in an envelope, delivered to the main gate before dawn, collected by the night staff, placed on Kaylin's desk before 6. Wraith brought it without opening it. Kaylin read it alone, then read it again. Then set it down and sat very still for a long time, the specific quality of stillness that Wraith, watching from the doorway, had only seen once before in 14 years. What does it say? Wraith asked. It says he has documentation, connecting this estate to 3 separate arrangements that would be... A pause. Difficult to explain to the relevant parties. Fabricated? Kaylin set the envelope down. Almost certainly. A beat. Which makes it no less effective. Wraith waited. He's proposing an exchange, Kaylin said. The documentation, for her. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. He wants Saoirse, Wraith said. He wants access to whatever her mother knew, whatever she might remember, or eventually piece together. Kaylin's voice was even, terrifyingly even. She's not a person to him. She's the last unresolved piece from something he spent 15 years putting behind him, and he wants to finish it. Silence. How long does he give you? Wraith asked. 72 hours. And if you refuse? Kaylin looked at the envelope on his desk, at the neat, precise handwriting that knew exactly what it was asking and exactly what refusal would cost. He publishes. The estate gets scrutinized. Arrangements in 6 countries are examined. 12 years of work unravels over documents that may not even be real. He paused. And regardless of the outcome, the disruption alone would be enough. So he has you. He thinks he has me? Wraith looked at him carefully. Does he? Kaelin walked to the window. Stood there looking at the courtyard where Zoran Hale had stood 2 nights ago and looked up. There is no version of this, Kaelin said quietly, in which I hand her over to him. Then what's the version that resolves this? A very long silence. I don't know yet, Kaelin said. Wraith had worked for this man for 14 years. He had watched him navigate things that would have undone most people, precisely, without visible strain, without hesitation. He had never heard him say he didn't know, not once, not about anything that mattered. Until now. That, more than the envelope, more than the timeline, told Wraith everything about where this was heading, and the honesty of it was the most unsettling thing he had heard in 14 years of service. He left Kaelin alone. Outside the door, he stood in the corridor and understood, with absolute clarity, that the next 72 hours would determine everything. Not just for the estate. For all of them. She found out the same way she always found out things in this house. She noticed the shift in how people moved. The extra presence outside her door the next morning. 2 of Wraith's staff, positioned with the practiced casualness of people trying not to look like they were positioned. The way Dressler handed her the morning schedule without meeting her eyes. She went to the top floor. She didn't knock. She opened the door. Kaelin looked up from his desk. Something crossed his face. Not irritation. Something closer to resignation. The expression of a man who had watched an inevitability arrive slightly ahead of schedule. Sit down, he said. Tell me, she said. She stayed standing. He told her. All of it. The envelope. The exchange. The 72 hours. He told her without softening it, without managing the delivery. Completely. Or not at all. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You should accept the terms, she said. No. Kaelin. No. Not loud, not heated. Just absolute. The kind of no that was not the beginning of a negotiation. 12 years of work, she said. Arrangements in 6 countries. People who depend on. Do not, he said, and something entered his voice that she hadn't heard before, unguarded, without any of its usual layers. Tell me what the calculation of this is. I've already done the calculation, 40 times since 6 this morning. And the answer is the same every time. He stood, moved from behind the desk, stopped in front of her, close. There is no version of this where I send you to a man who spent 15 years erasing your mother and then erasing you. Her breath went somewhere complicated. That's not rational, she said softly. I know. You've built your entire life on being rational. I know that too. She looked at him, really looked, the way she had been trying not to look for weeks, because looking felt like stepping off something without knowing how far down the ground was. Why? She asked. One word. The only word left. He looked back at her, and for the first time since she had known him, his expression had nothing left in it. No management, no distance. Just the truth, sitting there quietly, waiting to be said. You already know why, he said. She did. That was the part that made her chest ache. And before either of them could say another word, before the moment could become something that couldn't be undone, Wraith's voice came through the door. We have a problem. Zoran Hale arrived before the 72 hours were up, not with notice, not with a warning. He simply arrived. A small group of associates at the outer boundary of the estate, blocking communications from outside. 2 more already on the grounds through the south wall access that Wraith had flagged as a concern months ago and been told to address when the schedule allowed. The schedule had not allowed. Kalen moved through the estate with Wraith beside him and several of his staff ahead. And Saoirse, who had been told to stay in the study, who had agreed to stay in the study, who had lasted approximately 45 seconds before following, 3 paces behind. "I told you to stay," Kalen said without turning around. "You did," she agreed. "I decided against it. This is not a situation that benefits from conversation. Then I won't converse. I'll just be here." He stopped walking, turned, looked at her with an expression that was, for one unguarded moment, visibly exasperated and entirely human. Then he kept moving. They reached the east courtyard. Zoran Hale stood at the center of it, composed, unhurried. The bearing of a man who had walked into many rooms and walked out of all of them. "Kalen," he said, almost warmly, "you look well." "You came early," Kalen said. I got impatient. Zoran's eyes moved, briefly, precisely, to Saoirse. "Hello, Saoirse." She said nothing. "You have your mother's posture," he said. "I noticed that the first time I saw you." "You knew her," Saoirse said. "I knew of her." A slight, careful correction. She was very good at her work. The interpretation, the access it gave her. A pause. The things she overheard because people underestimate interpreters. "And you made sure she paid for it," Saoirse said. The courtyard went very quiet. Zoran's expression didn't shift. It simply settled. The way expressions settle when someone has acknowledged, without confirming, that a truth has been spoken. "You're going to cooperate with me," he said, to Kalen, "because the alternative is more costly for you?" "The alternative," Kalen said, "is that you leave." Zoran was unmoved. "I have associates at your communications line, documentation ready to be shared, and a very strong interest in resolving this tonight." "So do I," Kalen said. A charged silence settled between them, the kind that builds between two people who have known each other long enough to understand exactly where this moment has been heading. And then Saoirse said, "I'll go with you." Every head turned. Kalen turned. His expression was for one instant impossible to read, and then it wasn't. It was the opposite. It was everything he had been carrying for 3 weeks, visible all at once with no time to manage it. "No," he said. "He needs me," she said quietly. "Not the estate. Me. So if I go..." "You are not going." "If I cooperate with him, you keep your arrangements. Your people are protected." "Saoirse." Her name in his voice like that, low, stripped of everything, just the word and what it cost him to say it, stopped her completely. She looked at him. "I told you," he said. "There is no version of this." Zoran observed this exchange with the expression of a man recalculating, and that was the moment Saoirse understood something she had been moving toward without realizing it. That this man, this silent, controlled man who had not smiled in all the years people had known him, had made a decision about her that had nothing to do with usefulness or strategy. That decision was standing in this courtyard, visible to everyone, completely undefended. She had 2 choices: step away and protect him from that visibility, or stop retreating from what she was. She thought of her mother, of a woman who had been careful and quiet and invisible right up until the moment she wasn't. Saoirse was not her mother. She had never truly been invisible. She had just been in the wrong rooms. She turned to Zoran. "You said my mother overheard things because people underestimate interpreters." "Yes," Zoran said carefully. "People also underestimate maids." She held his gaze. "I've been in this estate for 3 weeks. I've been in every room on every floor. I've polished every surface and been present in every space that people treat as background." A pause. "I've heard things. I've understood things said in front of me because nobody thought I was listening." Zoran's expression changed. Very slightly, but it changed. And I have very good memory, Saoirse said. My mother used to say it was a gift. I think she knew, even then, that I might need it. She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a small folded piece of paper. I've been writing things down since my second day here. Dates, names, conversations, connections. She held it up. This isn't everything, but it's enough to make your documentation irrelevant. Because whatever you publish, I can answer. And whatever you claim, I can contradict. With specifics. With witnesses. The courtyard was absolutely still. Zoran looked at the piece of paper, then at her. And something in his expression, for the first time, was not certainty. It was what lived underneath certainty when certainty left the room. Kaelin said nothing. But beside her, she felt him. And that was enough. Zoran Hale left. Not because he was forced to. He left because Saoirse had done something his entire plan had not accounted for. She had made it too costly. Not impossible. Too costly. Men like Zoran understood that calculation precisely. When pursuing something demands more than the prize is worth. He had come to close the last open chapter of something he had spent 15 years resolving. What he found was that the chapter had been writing itself down for 3 weeks. He looked at her one last time before he got into the car. She looked back, steady, unhurried, the way her mother had probably looked in rooms where people underestimated her. The car left through the south gate. The courtyard exhaled. Wraith began restoring communications, reviewing access points, accounting for everything that had shifted in the past hour. His staff moved with practiced efficiency. Around her, the estate resumed its functions like a machine returning to temperature, and Kaelin stood very still. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not the assessment, not the careful management. Something unguarded. Something that had been forced past his capacity to contain it, and had decided in the past hour to stop pretending it was closed. You wrote it down, he said. I write everything down. My memory is reliable, but I don't trust it when I'm uncertain. So I write things down. For 3 weeks. From the second day. I felt something was off before I understood what it was. And I've learned to trust that feeling. He was quiet for a moment. You could have told me. I didn't know you yet. She held his gaze. And I wasn't sure what I was noticing would matter. I just knew that paying attention was the only thing I had. It was enough, he said. It was, she agreed. This time. She thought about leaving. She had been thinking about it. Not because she wanted to, but because staying felt like a room she had wandered into that wasn't meant for her, where she had become too comfortable, too visible, and too real. I should probably... She started. Don't. She stopped. He took 3 steps toward her, stopped in front of her. The same distance as the corridor, the study, every moment in this estate where they had stood at the edge of something without crossing it. I have been trying, he said very quietly, for 3 weeks, to find the correct category for you. She said nothing, for once. Staff. Complication. Variable. Each word deliberate. I have been through every category I have, and you don't fit any of them. I'm aware I'm difficult to categorize, she said softly. You're not difficult. You're just... Something moved through his expression. Not a category. You're a person. And I have spent a very long time making sure that no person had enough proximity to... He stopped. To what? She asked. He looked at her. And then Kaelin Voss said, to matter. Just that word. Just the one. And the corner of his mouth moved. Not widely, not dramatically, not the kind of smile that performed itself. The kind that happened before you could stop it. Small. Real. The involuntary, helpless expression of a man who had just said something true in front of someone who would hear it. Saoirse felt it before she saw it, and she understood, in that moment, what the man who had dropped his pen had witnessed. Why it had been so startling. Why it had meant something that nothing else had meant in all those years. Because it wasn't just a smile. It was the whole of him, briefly, without defense. She reached up, very slowly, touched the corner of his jaw, not asking for anything, just acknowledging it. The way she acknowledged things she didn't want to leave unnamed. "There," she said softly. "Was that so catastrophic?" He looked at her. "Yes. You survived it. Barely." She laughed, quietly. And he looked at the laugh the way someone looks at a light in a window after a very long time in the dark. Months later, in the East Corridor, Dressler would tell the new staff about the rule of the house. They would ask if it had ever been broken. She would look at the painting third from the left. Straight now. "Once," she would say, "someone talked to a painting." She would not smile, but something in her expression would suggest she did not entirely disapprove. Upstairs, in the study where silence had once been the only atmosphere, Kalen Voss sat behind his desk. Across from him sat Saoirse, going through the morning correspondence with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had recently been given administrative access and was making full use of it. She was talking about a letter from someone named Aurelio, who wrote with the grammar of a man who was deeply frustrated but trying very hard to sound reasonable, which she found relatable and funny. About the painting in the East Corridor, and whether it would be rude to rename it since she had spent more time with it than with most people she had ever known. Kalen had a document in front of him. He was supposed to be reading it. He wasn't. He was listening to her, water finding its way back to ground long parched, and his face was doing the thing it had been doing quietly, without strategy, for months now. The same thing the man had dropped his pen for. Small, real, devastating. Outside, the city moved. Inside, the estate breathed. Steadier than in years, warmer than anyone could quite explain, filled with a sound that no one had heard within these walls for 2 decades. Someone was talking, and someone was finally, fully, listening. If this story reached something in you, subscribe. The next one is already waiting.